This is Solving Quadratic Equations, Unit 4, Section 1. So there are three sections of this note. The first one is solving by graphing. So example, solve the equation by graphing. To solve by graphing, you simply look at the graph that's given to you and look at the x-axis. So right here. And we want to find where the graph, the line, crosses or touches the x-axis. So in this graph we have -3 and +2. That is my answer. And that's it. So just find where it crosses or touches, and that's your answer. So number 2. So again, I want to look at just the x-axis. And on this one, notice it touches at -3. So -3 would be my only answer. So my only other option for this, I can either touch it once and turn around, I can cross it twice, or if I don't cross or touch it all, then my answer would be no solution. So that's my only three options I have for this type of question. And if you want to graph real quick, it's like if I had this one and my graph was way down here, notice it didn't touch the x-axis at all, and that would be no solution, or the other one would be going up. As long as it doesn't touch that horizontal line, then it'd be no solution. Otherwise, you'd have one or two numbers, and that's it. Number 2, or B, solve quadratics by square roots. Now, you notice on these 3 and 4, 3 does not have parentheses and 4 does. Those are the only two ways you're going to see this kind of question. So, for the one that does not have parentheses, the first thing I want to do is move the number that's not with x squared to the other side of the equation. So of course this comes down, and that would be 36. Okay, and then I want to get x squared by itself, so I just divide by 9. Of course that gives me 4. And lastly, I want x, and I have x squared. So the opposite of squaring is square root. So I would do the square root of both sides. That would give me x equals, and whenever you add a square root to a question, you have to include the positive and negative of the answer. Because, so this would be my answer, real quick. That's it. Plus and minus 2. You can also write it, if you'd like, as 2, -2. That would be okay. The reason is if I have 2 squared, I get 4. And if I have -2 squared, I also get 4. So because I'm going backwards, I'm going from 4 to my answer on both of these, I have to include both numbers because either one works, and I don't know which one it is. That's why it's both. That means I can plug in both of those numbers for x, and I would get the same answer. So that's number 3. Now, number 4 is a little different because I have parentheses. And so if I have parentheses, if I have a number out front like I do here, I'm just going to move that number over here. And if it's a fraction, I flip it to the other side. If it's not a fraction, if it was just a whole number, I would just divide. But because I have a fraction, I'm going to flip it over. So this part didn't change. And then I do 7 times 5, which is 35. Okay, now I have parentheses squared, right? There's my square. And I have equals 35. I want to get rid of the square now. So now is when I would do my square root for this one. Of course, on the left, that just makes everything in the parentheses come out. And on the right, If I can do the square root as a whole number, I would. If not, I leave it. In this case, there's no whole number that's a square root of 35, so I would just put plus minus square root of 35. And since I'm trying to solve for x, my last step would be to move this 10 over here. And it can go in the front or behind it, it doesn't matter. So my final answer would be x equals plus minus square root of 35 minus 10. Now, of course, if I could do that and have a number, just real quick on the side, if I had, say, x plus 10 equals plus minus 2, like if I could do it and get a number and be plus minus a number, when I move it over here and I do minus 10, I would have to do x equals 2 minus 10 and negative 2 minus 10 and get two different answers. So if I have a number, I actually have to continue all the way to the end, and so my answers would be negative 8, negative 12, and that's just an example. But if I don't have a number that I can't do the square root like I did in my note in the notes here, I just leave it as a square root and that's it. So it just depends on what you have. So that's 3 and 4. Again, you can have parentheses or not, and that's how they look for that one. The last two are factoring. So hopefully factoring is something that you might remember a little bit. You're good at, you're not good at, it's okay. So let's just go through this. So the first step in factoring always is GCF, which means greatest common factor, but in other words, what number can I divide all three numbers by? In this case, it's a 2. Okay, because they're all even, I can divide by 2. And something else to note, and you might want to write this down in your notes, if my first number, my a, is negative, then my GCF has to be negative. Whoa, not that one. So if I have a negative in the front, my GCF is at least negative 1. If not something else, it's negative, okay? So if you ever have a negative here, you have to have a negative down here. All right, so I'm going to write my GCF out front, and then I'm going to divide everything. So I have negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1, x squared. 22 divided by negative 2 is minus 11x. And negative 56 divided by negative 2 is 28. Okay? Now, here's where I can get to the factoring part. This is what I want. Because I'm solving, I don't really need the GCF anymore. So this number doesn't matter. I don't need it. So we're not going to focus on that right now. So here's what I do when I factor. There are different ways to factor. This is just how I do it. I multiply the first number and the last number together. So 1 times 28 is 28. That's the first thing that I do. The next thing that I do is I go ahead and write my two parentheses, because when you factor, that's typically what you end up with. Now, I want two numbers that multiplies to 28 and adds to negative 11. So if you need to, you can come over here and write those out. So let's see, 28. I have 28 and 1, 14 and 2, 7 and 4, and that's it. So if I go through these, 28 and 1, there's no way that's 11. 14 and 2, the closest I can get is 12. 7 and 4 actually adds to 11. So that's what I want. Okay, so I have 7 and 4. Doesn't matter which order they go in. That's okay. And because I'm multiplying to a positive number, they have to be the same sign. But notice, this one is a negative 11, so this has to be negative and negative. Okay? So you kind of have to play around with the signs sometimes on which one's negative and positive, or if they're both the same. So it just depends on what you have. Okay, the last thing that I do is whatever x you have in the front, whatever x squared is, you just write the number with x. you don't square it, because I'm pretty much taking my two x's, or my x squared, the two x's in the front, and I split it up between each parenthesis. Okay? Now, the next step I do, almost done, I swear, I promise, is I look at my parentheses. Between 1 and -7, can I reduce that? Can I divide that by the same number? No, I can't, so I leave it alone. And then on the right one, I do the same thing. 1 and -4, can't reduce that either. So my final solution, because I'm trying to solve, right? I don't want parentheses with x's, I want actual numbers. So I'm going to take whatever number is right here, and I change the sign. So -7 becomes +7, and you divide by whatever number's in front of x. So 1. Same thing on the right. I take this number, change the sign, and I divide by whatever number's in front of x. Now, I can reduce these, because 7 over 1 is just 7, 4 over 1 is just 4, and that's my answer. I know that looked like it felt like it took longer than it should, but with explaining and showing a bunch of steps, it does take longer, but as you practice, it does get quick. So that's how you factor and solve. So this one won't take as long, because if you look at the three numbers, I do not have a GCF, so I can go ahead and multiply first number and last number, and I get -30. Okay, so my next thing is, I know I'm going to have two parentheses, and I need two numbers that add to -30, multiply to -30, add to 13. So if you need to, come over here. I have 30 and 1, I have 15 and 2, I have 10 and 3, and 6 and 5. Okay, the only ones I could get to, well, there's two that can get to 13. That cannot, and that cannot. So I have 10 and 3 and 15 and 2. If I add 10 and 3, I get 13. If I do 15 minus 2, I get 13. So notice, I'm trying to get to a +13, but I want to multiply to a -30. So multiplying to a negative, I have to have at least one of these be negative. Well, on the 10 and 3, there's nowhere I could put a negative that would make it +13, so that one's out. But if I do 15 minus 2, I get 13. So those are going to be my two numbers. Again, it doesn't matter which order they go in. And then I take whatever my x squared is, and I put 6x here and 6x here. Okay? Now I want to make sure I reduce these. I can divide 6 and 15 by 3. I can divide 6 and -2 by 2. So I want to reduce these if I can. So 6 divided by 3 is 2x. 15 divided by 3 is 5. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3x. -2 divided by 2 is -1. And last thing, I take my number, flip the sign, and divide by whatever number's in front of x. Take my number, flip the sign, and divide by whatever number is in front of x. Now, I can't reduce either one of these, so that would just be my answer. So I have -5/2 and 1/3. So notice that one didn't take near as long because we didn't have to go through a bunch of explaining. And it gets faster the more you do it, because again, I'm showing a lot more steps and explaining everything, where if you're just working these out, you're going a little faster than I did. So that's it for this section. If you need more practice, you have the homework. There's plenty of practice on there. And we have a review after section 2 that has more of this on there as well.